Hi, everyone, and welcome to this podcast dedicated to the efficiency of fiscal policies, their impacts, and extreme cases of IS and LM. Let's first come back to the formula of the multiplier that we obtained in the previous podcast. We can see that the multiplier will be larger if the marginal propensity to save is low, the investment is not too sensitive to the interest rate, the demand for money is not too sensitive to the income, and the demand for money is very sensitive to the interest rate. We will focus our analysis on the sensitivity of investment and of the demand for money to the interest rate, because we know that the marginal propensity to save and the sensitivity of money demand to the income are relatively stable in the economy. We are going to use our knowledge on the IS and LM curves to answer the following question. How efficient is the fiscal policy depending on the slopes of the curves IS and LM and depending on the characteristics of the economy that these slopes represent? Suppose an expansionary fiscal policy, DG higher than zero, financed by borrowing. Let's also keep an eye on the formula for the short-term multiplier to have all the elements necessary for the analysis. How do the slopes of IS and LM affect the impact of the policy? Let's first focus on IS. Imagine an economy starting at E0 and the government puts in place an expansionary fiscal policy. IS shifts to the right, and we reach E1. We can see the crowding out effect, because at E1, the interest rate has increased, which has reduced the level of investment. Remember that on the graph, the crowding out effect is the difference between YF and Y1. Imagine now that IS is less steep. If we start from E0, IS shifts again to the right. But this time we reach E2 with a lower income than at E1. The crowding out effect is stronger here. IS is less steep, which means that the investment is more sensitive to the interest rate. So even if the interest rate increases less here than in the first case, the investment reacts more to this increase. So for an IS curve that is less steep, a fiscal policy is less efficient. Let's now focus on LM. The more LM is steep, the less the money demand is sensitive to the interest rate. We start at E0 with an LM curve that is not very steep. After IS shifts to the right, to reach the equilibrium on the money market, we need an increase in the interest rate. This increase is relatively low because the money demand is very sensitive to the interest rate. A low increase in the interest rate is therefore sufficient to decrease the money demand for speculative motives. In this case, the increase in the interest rate from R0 to R1 is relatively moderate, and the income increases from Y0 to Y1. The crowding out effect is therefore limited. Now, if we start from E0, but this time with a steep LM curve, in this case, we will need a much stronger increase in the interest rate to decrease the money demand for speculative motives. and come back to the equilibrium on the money market. Therefore, the interest rate increases a lot from R0 to R2, and the impact on the level of investment, the crowding out effect, is stronger. So the less LM is steep, the more efficient the fiscal policy. Overall, to sum up, the fiscal policy is more efficient if IS is steep, meaning if the elasticity of the investment to the interest rate is low. And it is also more efficient if LM is not so steep, meaning if the elasticity of the money demand to the interest rate is high. We can then deduct the cases of maximal efficiency of the fiscal policy. The efficiency is maximal in two cases. First case, when the money demand is infinitely elastic to the interest rate, when LM is horizontal. In this case, the interest rate will not react following the increase in borrowing from the state. It remains constant, and there is no crowding out effect. This is the Keynesian case of the liquidity trap. According to Keynes, this case is common in recessions and justifies state intervention through fiscal policies, because then it's very efficient to stimulate the economy. Second case, when the investment is rigid to the interest rate, when IS is vertical. In this case, the increase in demand of loanable funds from the states does trigger an increase in the interest rate. But this increase in the interest rate does not impact investment, because investment is independent from the interest rate. This is the Keynesian case of the accelerator effect, whereby investment does not depend on the interest rate, but rather on the expectations of firms, for instance. Overall, the effect of fiscal policies is maximal when there is no crowding out effect, either in the case of the liquidity trap or in the case of the accelerator effect. The Keynesian cross is an extreme case that combines the two Keynesian cases and which gives a complete efficiency of fiscal policies. Be careful, once again, remember that we are here in the short term with fixed prices and wages. Our conclusions will change later when we deal with flexible prices and wages. Symmetrically, we can show the cases of maximal inefficiency of fiscal policies. Again, two cases here. First, when the investment is perfectly elastic to the interest rate, IS horizontal. In this case, as soon as there are upward pressures on the interest rate due to the increase in demand of loanable funds from the state to finance the policy, the investment decreases a lot and compensates the increase in G. In other words, the investment is so sensitive to the interest rate that it reacts for infinitely small changes of the interest rate, so small that the IS curve is actually horizontal and the interest rate does not vary. The increase in G is then instantaneously and massively compensated by the increase in investment. Second case, when the demand for money is rigid to the interest rate, LM vertical. In this case, the crowding out effect is total, already in the short term. The increase in R is so large that it cancels the effect of the increase in G. Private investment decreases as much as public spending increases. This is the classical case of neutral money. Hence, the multiplier is equal to 0 when the crowding out effect is total, in the case that IS is horizontal or that LM is vertical. There is what we call the classical cross, which combines these two cases with IS horizontal and LM vertical. In this case, the inefficiency is total. Of course, in practice, we don't really see these extreme cases in reality. They mostly serve as frameworks for macroeconomic analysis. So, to sum up, for Keynesians, fiscal policies are very efficient, while for classical economists, fiscal policies are inefficient. For all the other cases that are in the intermediary zone, fiscal policies remain efficient, at least in the short term, and the crowding out effect is partial. Once again, remember that here we are based on the strong short-term assumption that prices and wages are fixed. Our conclusions will change when prices and wages become flexible.